Thanks very much. Morning, South Africa. The best cup of coffee in the morning is the first one, and I get to share it with you. Okay, let me do the screen share thing just to prove that I can. All right, so the number one question that I get asked when I go to conferences, and it doesn't matter what I'm talking about. If I'm talking about UX, this is the question that people come up to me at the end of workshops, at the end of talks, and they say, how do I make my organization more customer centric? How do I get my organization to get what I do and to do what I do? So it felt like a good thing to be talking about, especially at the start of the day. And as Iggy says, I've helped organizations throughout my career to adopt customer-centric methods and to become more user-centric. And right now, I'm studying a couple of hundred companies across multiple countries to look at how they're doing it. A few years ago, I was working with a big American retailer and looking at how they could, strengthen their user experience. And I was talking to the senior leadership team, and I just asked them this question: how customer centric do you think you are? And they said, well, we are really customer centric. I mean, we have amazing tools for social media listening. And obviously, that is not what being a customer-centered organization means. But if we're going to talk about how people make their companies more customer-centric, we're going to have to define what we mean by that. And another CEO that I was talking to put it really bluntly to me. He said, well, everyone says that they want to be customer-centric. Everybody, you talk to anybody, so nobody's going to say, well, I don't want to be customer centric, but no one can explain what that means. Nobody can say, okay, this is it. And that really stopped me in my tracks, because up until that point, I'd never really thought about it. So if we're going to think about how we make our organizations more customer centric, we need to understand what that means, not just for us, not just for our practice, not just for user experience, because we talk to users. That's our job. That's the way that we do things. But if you're going to make your whole organization customer centric, you need to have an idea of what that might mean for the marketing department. You need to have an idea of what that might mean for legal, for finance. And, what we're not talking about is everyone in the company coming to us and asking us what to do. It's not all about us. It needs to be something that everyone can participate in. So what does it mean when a whole organization is customer centric? Well, I think that in what we do, there are three related areas of practice that I keep coming back to, three disciplines where I'm like, okay, these are the foundations of what I do. And they're not just about design. So I think about Agile, which is not a design methodology, really, it's a software engineering methodology. It's about how do you build software. But you can start to, kind of spread it out and say, oh, well, it's kind of relevant to other things. And then there's Lean, which is really about any operation or process. Lean is about, how do you make a process work better? And, that's been applied in areas very close to what we do. So when you apply it to software engineering, you get DevOps. When you apply it to what we do, you get design ops. But you could apply that to what the finance department are doing. So Lean is a very flexible methodology. And then, of course, there is user-centered design, the what we do, which is really about imagining the future. That's our superpower. It's like, okay, here's what the future could look like if we implemented it. Well, those practices go well together. And I think they go well together because at the core of them, they have a number of values, a number of principles which they all agree on. So no matter how they're applying them, whether it's to software engineering or processes or design, they actually all agree that it's important to deliver user value. And they all talk about the need to deliver user value and to define user value. They're all evidence-based, right? They all talk about the need to go out and find evidence for the hypotheses that you have. And so there's this sense of, prove it. They're all iterative. They all talk about, building on what you know, building on what you have, about learning over time. And they're all collaborative. They all appreciate that to solve complex problems, you can't have a production line mentality. You need everyone in the room to say, from my point of view, this problem looks like this. And then you get a 360 view, and then you understand the best solution. So when I think about, well, what does it mean to be a user-centered organization? I think that everyone in the organization needs to be working to these principles. They all need to be thinking about user value. They all need to be thinking about, wait, do we have evidence for what it is we say we're about to do? They all need to be building on something that they know works, and they all need to be working cross-functionally, collaboratively. And doing that, in the sense that everything that the organization does is done with the user in mind. So that feels like a good definition, something we can start to build on, something we can start to say, okay, well, what would happen if we applied this to different parts of our organization? When I'm thinking about making a company more user-centric, you have to understand that that it's about more, right? So people will start off with this, and then they'll move to this, and then they'll move to this. In other words, there's a progression. You move through sort of layers of maturity. And in our industry, there are actually several UX maturity models that exist out there, and they have similarities, and they give us a way of thinking about what the more bit means, what we're moving from and what we're moving to. So here's an example. This is the Nielsen-Norman model of UX maturity. I could have picked another, but I like this one, and it's thoughtfully put together. And essentially, you're moving from low maturity, UX is absent, to high maturity. The whole organization is user driven, and you can see that there's different descriptions of what the organization is like, and there are also, at each stage, you can see different barriers to moving through UX maturity. So I guess one of the first things that you realize when you're trying to answer that difficult question, how do I make my organization more customer centric, is, well, the answer to that is going to be different depending on your level of UX maturity. The answer to that is going to be different as you grow. We'll come back to the idea of UX maturity at the end, because I think actually things are a little more complicated than that. But I like it because it's a nice, easy way of thinking about this progression. And so when people ask me that question of, how do I make my organization more user-centric? The first thing to remember is it depends on how mature your organization is. For instance, in organizations that have low UX maturity, I guess the question I get most commonly is, well, how do I get my boss to understand that this is important? How do I get people to listen to me? And listening is a core skill for what we do. What we do is listen to users. So immediately we've got something that we can and should build on that. We should treat this like a user-centered design problem. If we want to get our boss to listen, maybe the best place to begin is to listen to our bosses and to try and understand the world from their point of view, to try and make user-centered design more boss-centered. So when we listen to our bosses, what we're really trying to do is say, well, what is it that you are trying to achieve? And an even better question, actually, for your boss is, what is your boss trying to achieve? In other words, what is our boss's boss trying to achieve? What is the person that they're trying to impress trying to achieve? And when you ask that question, you get back a ton of answers. Well, what we need is to lower the cost of maintenance, or we need faster time to market, or we need new innovative products and services, or, well, one of these things. And for me, the great thing about this is that user experience actually has something to say about all of these things. When I have applied UX processes and methods to product teams, those teams have accelerated time to market. I remember talking to one business leader who said, all the things we thought you were doing that were slowing us down actually speeded us up, actually helped us to focus and make better decisions. UX has, it's more than just, well, we're going to improve things for the users. It achieves all of these things. And it's pretty likely that your boss is going to say, well, what I need to deliver is something on this list. But listen, because once you understand what it is that your boss is trying to achieve, you can align your practice with that. You can say, okay, well, here's how what I do can contribute to that. It's tempting perhaps to go, well, you know what? I could just copy this list down and say, look at all of the things that I can do for you. And funnily enough, that would be a mistake, because when people see a long list, you're like, I do all of these things. They don't assume that, oh gosh, look at all the extras that I'm getting. They think, oh, look at all of the unwanted stuff that I'm getting. I really wanted Giles to be concentrating on, giving us a faster time to market. And he'll do a little bit of that, but he'll also be differentiating our product and brand, which I really don't want him to be focused on. They'll see this as a kind of a feature dump. They'll see this as unwanted extras. Begin by listening. Make people feel listened to, and they will listen to you. And you will know where to focus your attention and say, okay, we're going to do a flavor of user-centered design which helps you deliver this. And you will know what it is that you're being judged on as well. So get your boss to listen. If you want anybody to listen to you, you have to begin by listening. As people progress, and as UX starts to become more accepted within an organization, often the next problem people face is, well, how do I show that what I'm doing is strategically important? How do I stop just doing, interface design and start designing the stuff around it? How do I start choosing what it is that we do? How do I get a seat at that table? And essentially what they're saying is, well, how do I change the nature of my role? How do I step up into another role? One of the UX leaders that I was interviewing as part of this Google study talked about coming in to lead his team and how he needed his team to step up into that more strategic role. So the first question you have to answer when you do that is, okay, if I'm going to do this new thing, this strategic thing, what is it that I'm going to give up doing in order to make space for it? Changing your role means letting go of something in order to make space for something. And for this leader, getting his team to operate in a more strategic way was really about saying, you know what, a lot of what we're doing is usability testing on user interface. We need to teach the dev team to do more of that for themselves so that we can make space and time to do the strategic stuff. And that can feel scary. Whenever I've grown in my career, I realize now that I've had to often give away the thing that I thought defined me in order to make space for the next thing. And when I've had the courage to do that, it's always been a trigger for tremendous growth. So you have to kind of give away who you are today in order to be who you need to be tomorrow. So your focus changes, and the sort of work, I think, that you're doing changes as well. In other words, instead of focusing your user inquiry on does this work for you, you start to focus your user inquiry on, actually, user, tell me about your life. Where does our companies or organizations' services start to touch you? And you start to lift up your head and create something like this. This is what I call an experience map. You may call it something different. My friend Indy Young has written the definitive book on how to create something like this and how to direct your user research practice to this. And she calls it Mental Models. That's the title of Indy's book, Mental Models. And essentially a map like this is saying, okay, well, we're going to, at the top half, create our user journey. There it is in blue. And then think about at each step in the user journey, what is it that we've seen customers doing? What are the needs that they have? What are the jobs to be done? Essentially, that's what we're doing. We're saying, okay, at this point in the user journey, the jobs to be done are this. And then we can look at, okay, well, what it is that we do, and identify where there are gaps. We can identify where there are pain points. Identify where there are opportunities that we can improve. An experience map like this gives you a strategic view of the user experience, and it gives you the ground on which you can say, okay, here are a bunch of opportunities, and then you can start to overlay data on that. You can say, okay, here are our website analytics. Here's our sales performance at each step in the sales funnel. Here's how many people are dropping out. Here's what sentiment looks like. Here's how happy or unhappy our customers are. So you can go back to those pain points or gaps that you've identified and said, well, which ones of these are likely to have the biggest impact on sales or on customer satisfaction? You can start to prioritize, in other words. That ability to look at the sweep of user experience and to set priorities and to align those priorities with business outcomes, that is how you get to be more strategic. And that's what you need to create space for in your practice, at least as you're moving from being a practitioner who's not listened to a practitioner who's starting to get a seat at the table. One other question I get as people's maturity progresses is this: how do I get permission to fail? I want to be able to fail fast, and people don't accept that we should be trying to fail in our company. And how do I get my boss to give me that space? I say, you have got to be crazy. You never go to your boss and say, hey, can I fail, please? Because of course your boss will say no. That's not what your boss wants. Your boss doesn't want failure. We have this sort of language, this jargon that we use. Fail fast. Failure. It's important to be allowed to fail, and I think sometimes we get a bit wrapped up in that jargon because failure is not the goal, and those statements end with the idea of failure. I think that there are eye-catching ways of reminding us, of course, that what we need to be able to do is to learn, and you learn by failing. But that's really what we should be focusing on when we're asking for permission to do something. We're not asking for permission to fail. We're asking for permission to learn, and to learn by experimenting. And that's a much better thing to be asking for. You've got to speak the language of the people that you're trying to convince. So you don't ask for permission to fail. You say, hey, we've got a job to do, and before we go out and build this thing, can we run some experiments to find out which design direction is best? And that's the sort of thing that does get a nod, that does get a yes. We don't want to waste time heading off in the wrong direction. Let's run some small, quick experiments. I've got some ideas on how to do that so that we know the best way. You'll get a yes more often than not. So I guess the lesson is, not to get wrapped up in our jargon, to speak the language of the people that we're trying to convince. Okay, so as that maturity progresses, you think about the middle stages of the maturity model, and what's happening is UX is becoming accepted and becoming a way of doing things, and you're moving into a world where that you're starting to codify that UX process. This is the UX process that I tend to use. This is the discover, alpha, beta process. The idea that you divide any kind of change program into these three phases, and just as we're not failing, we're trying to learn, is really about removing risk. So this whole UX process is about removing risk from the idea of from creating change. And it says, okay, well, at the start, when we're deciding what we should change or trying to understand the change, the risk is that we might solve a problem that doesn't need to be solved, or solve a problem that's not the most valuable. Then as we move to alpha, the risk is that we might choose a solution which isn't viable or isn't the best possible solution out there. And then as we start to implement it, that we lose sight of the user. We don't deliver it the right way. And so the discover, alpha, beta process is really a way of talking about risk at each step, talking about the learning, the thing that we need to learn at each step, and making a space for experiments at each step. And I think that there's as people get into those sort of middle areas of UX maturity, what you find is organizations getting it, realizing that, oh yes, okay, and we need to do experiments, and the nature of those experiments changes as we go through the process, and starting to implement UX process. And actually there's a lot of I hear a lot of people talking in our industry about UX process. It's a big topic of conversation. And of course, if what you're doing is leading that change into a more user-centered organization, then once again, your role has changed from a UX strategist to somebody who's running this change program. And this is really about being a product manager. So at the point when UX processes start to become adopted, they start to be owned by product management, product managers. And the role changes and the scope changes. And again, you need either to clear out space in your life to adopt this role, or to make sure that the people in this role understand how the UX process de-risks what they're doing. And that kind of takes us to about level 4 in that maturity model. And then there's a problem, because what I hear again and again from people is, okay, we've got to that point and we just don't seem to be able to get beyond it. And that seems to be a common refrain. How do we get a seat at the top table? What is the next thing that's going on? And once again, there's a change, a shift in who needs to own this and what it is that's being talked about and done. So we're moving out of the idea of, okay, well, this is about the product management role and into something beyond that. We're talking about how the organization operates in general. And we are talking about the way that the organization chooses to change. In other words, we're into this world of project governance, and where I see an awful lot about user-centered design methodologies, about process. I don't see anything really written about user-centered governance. Governance is about looking at projects from the outside and saying, are these projects being well run? Are we choosing the right things to do? are we doing them the right way? When you think about it like that, it's a fairly simple step into user-centered governance. Really, you're talking about saying, okay, well, we have a process. Maybe what we need is a design authority to sit around that, to help our stakeholders to understand whether or not those projects are being run well. So, we have this many active projects, 10 active projects in discovery, and we have evaluated them and said that actually most of them, 9 out of those 10 projects, are following the discovery process that we've laid down. So now, please don't throw rocks at those 9, but there is a 10th one that we need to look at, and we need to look at it for these reasons. The problem that I hear people talk about at that sort of level 4 stage is that the organization is actually getting pretty good at doing user-centered design, but stakeholders just throw rocks at projects. Understanding of what governance looks like helps the stakeholders to understand whether a project is going well or not, whether they should be anxious, and frankly, what rocks to throw. So how do they talk to projects in order to get them to be more, in order to get them to deliver? In other words, those stakeholders and the governance processes that they're going through need to think about the principles of our practice. Has this project identified what user value is? Is this project team gathering evidence for the decisions that it's making? Is this project team iterating on things that it knows works? Is this project team collaborating effectively? If our stakeholders ask us those sorts of questions instead of the anxiety questions that I think we often get, well, that there's a user-centered sort of governance mentality within the organization. Some organizations have governance procedures written down. Some organizations, it's kind of in the air. It's kind of an unwritten set. But getting an organization to adopt a user-centered governance model is really the key to breaking out of level 4 and getting to those higher levels. So there's an interesting progression here. You think about, as we've moved from the questions at the early stages of maturity, which are really questions about skills and tools, to the questions at the middle stages of UX maturity, which are about what are the processes that we have, and then beyond that the governance that we have. As we move up and get user experience and customer centricity deeper within the fabric of the organization, we're kind of moving up this progression. And these are the different methods by which different levels of management seek to achieve their objectives. When you get to the very top, when you get to the level of the CEO and the C-suite, the tool that they have is really, how do we set the culture of the organization and the structure of the organization? And those are absolutely tools that are in the hands of the C-suite. Culture is unwritten, but culture is what gets valued around here, what gets rewarded around here, what gets spoken about as being important, but also what are the unspoken things that people can see being rewarded around here. And if an organization likes that people shout a lot in meetings, then people will shout a lot in meetings. And if an organization likes that people go out and talk to their customers, people will go out and talk to their customers. One change leader I worked with ran a fantastic program in her organization to get the people to operate in a more customer-centric way. And she did things at the level of, tools. So she gave people advice on how to talk to their customers and process, where, in projects it should be happening. But she was trying to get the senior managers to just go out and listen to their customers regularly, and she couldn't do it. It required the CEO to come in and say, I expect you all to do this, before people took it really seriously. And culture is absolutely in the hands of the CEO. And so if you're going to reach that last step, that highest level, that's really where you need to be operating. CEOs also get to say how this organization is structured. And organizational structure is about lines of reporting. It's about how power and influence flows through the organization. It's about what functions are next to which other functions. And in our practice, moving to a user-centered organization really means that we need a kind of a head of customer in that organization. That role is often around product and product management. And if that product management role is reporting in to the CEO and has the ability to influence each of the great silos of organizations, marketing, technology, and so on, then you have a structure where the customer is as important as the processes within the organization. And that's that final level. But in order to get there, we need to be talking to the CEO. And you can only really do that, I believe, once you've moved through those other layers. So we've come to some sort of answer of that question. How do you make an organization more customer-centric? That question changes as the customer becomes more mature, as the organization becomes more mature, and the methods and approaches that we need to put in place, therefore, change as the organization becomes more mature. I think this is the journey that we're all on. Once you start user-centered design, once you see what happens when human beings, people, try to use the stuff that we produce, once you watch that, you can't help but being bitten by the bug. And you can't help but wanting other people in the organization to join in. And I hope that's a source of success for you rather than a source of frustration. I think it's also the most powerful change tool that we have in our arsenal. That ability to show people, look, come with me, watch what our users are doing, watch what our customers are like, is the most powerful tool we have for creating change. A few years ago, I was working with an organization and they asked me to put together a business case for them for a large digital transformation project that they were considering. And so, as part of that business case, I did some user research. I said, okay, well, how is the current organization performing for customers? And we looked at what that performance improvement might be if they put this digital program in place and what it might cost. And we showed them that there was a positive cost benefit. And we did a good, thorough study, which they accepted. But if I'm honest, I think we'd sold it to them way before we finished the business case, because as we were running the user tests, as we were running, just showing, doing labs with customers on using the current digital products and services that they had, we invited the finance director in, among others, to watch. And when he saw what it was really like for customers to use those products, he was like, we have to change. He got bitten by the bug too. That's my point. I think it's the most powerful change tool in our arsenal. And I think that at any stage in the UX maturity process, if you're stuck, bringing in your boss to say, look what needs to happen, will excite them and get them on board, and I hope bring you the success that you need. Thank you very much.
Giles, thank you so much for that awesome and insightful talk.
Thank you, Iggy. Whenever I talk, I like to leave people with a few books to read. So for further reading on this topic, these are the books that I would recommend. I mentioned that last one that you can see, Mental Models by Indy Young, as a great book on how to create UX experience maps. It is fantastic. I think everybody should read it. It's just brilliant. If you're trying to convince somebody of something, the best book I've ever read on negotiation is this book, Never Split the Difference, by an FBI negotiator called Chris Voss. And his line is, you can't compromise in a negotiation. I negotiate hostages release, and I never say, well, I'll give you half the money if you kill the hostages a little bit. He negotiates to win, and his negotiating technique begins with listening. A brilliant book. If you're having trouble dealing with difficult or fractious people, Crucial Conversations is an amazing book. Org Design for Design Orgs by Peter Meerholtz is fantastic on what an organizational structure should look like, and what a user-centered organization looks like from the inside. And finally, if you want to understand how senior management could and should operate, this book, The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, is fantastic. So thanks, Iggy. That's my sort of recommended reading list for people who want to know more.
I've just taken a screenshot of it. So when we post the YouTube video, the recording of this to YouTube, I'll make mention of those books in the description as well.
Amazing, thank you.
So we've got a question, and please everyone add your questions to the Ask a Question component. The first question from James: in your opinion and experiences, where does the role of product manager end and the UX function begin? What are the rules of engagement?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really interesting question, because I think product management is such an ill-defined role, and almost everywhere I go, it's done differently. And some places the role of product manager is a role of lots of responsibility and no power. And in some places, product managers call the shots. So, bearing that in mind, I think my ideal is that the product manager is operating at the business level, but when I'm drawing an org chart and when I'm helping organizations to organize themselves, I like to see UX teams reporting into product management and to be, a key tool in the product manager's arsenal. So I think it's a natural progression for people in our line of work as your career progresses. That you can become a subject matter expert, you can become the head of user research, but or the head of user interface. But the more generalist progression is into product management, and I think naturally that your senior user experience people would report into them, and that's how I like to draw that up. I hope that answers your question, James. Did you have anything in particular in mind there? I don't know if the sort of text chat works well for follow-up questions.
So James will probably drop a message, but I have another question in relation to one of the things you spoke about, which was measuring the performance of an organization. So was there ever a scenario where you've had to go and in a consulting role to measure the performance and the UX maturity of an organization, provide them with the feedback and understanding, but they just completely disagreed, where they said, no, we believe we're actually more than what you're saying, or and if so, how did you overcome that kind of scenario to give them an understanding that no, this is actually where you are and not where you think you are?
That's an interesting question. Not as a blocker is the answer to that. I think I suppose that first organization I mentioned, that big retailer, where I said, "Are you user-centered?" And they were like, "Yeah, totally." Was, you know, an example of an organization that thought it was a high level of maturity, but it wasn't. But as an outsider coming in to an organization to create change, I'm in a rather fortunate position that people don't bring in outsiders to create change unless they think there is something that needs to change. And so even in that situation, you know, I didn't have to worry. I was like, okay, that's really interesting. Meanwhile, you've said that you're not happy with the quality of the user experience that you're delivering. So let's just park that rather odd notion you've got that it's all about, that being user-centered is all about social media listening, and let's look at the problem that you've asked me to come across. It gave me an insight into the mindset of the organization, but it didn't block change, because change was already on the agenda. I think that's the thing. You can't change an organization unless it wants to change, and that is a problem. So one organization I worked with, you know, we were brought in to look at the prototype they'd done for a major improvement. It was a bank, and it was a major improvement on their online savings accounts, and we ran usability tests, and we said this is a worse user experience than you're currently delivering, and if you put it live, you will, you know, customers will find it harder to use, and you will have all these problems. And that was an organization that didn't really want to change. We'd been brought in by the design team, who were trying to convince the operations director that this important change program that she was running was failing. And this is the worst example I've ever heard of it, because our lead consultant presented the report to the operations director, and she said, nobody will ever see this, because she had publicly committed to delivering that piece of software. And as far as she was concerned, success was delivering the program. Now, what actually happened was the program just collapsed after, you know, so we didn't get anywhere, but the program collapsed because, of course, it just wasn't working. It was dysfunctional. And, you know, sometimes people aren't ready to change, and they need to learn the hard way. And that's tough, but that is often the reality, that you know, you can't change people unless there's something that they want to change, and you can't change them until they're ready to change, which is why I say begin by listening. I think, you know, if I were to go back in time, we would have listened to her needs rather than the needs of the design team, and we would have realized that what she needed was a successful program, and we would have aligned what we do with, here's how to make sure this thing delivers and is not a total failure. Instead, we said, you're doing a bad job, which nobody wants to hear. So yeah, you know, I hope that answers that question about, you know, when is change blocked, and what do you need to do to get around it. I would say, you know, listen and hear what people do want to change, and then you might have a chance.
Thank you. I mean, so I've got a follow-up question, and it's a common theme that I've heard quite a few times, and you touched on it in your talk. So, currently what's happening is there's upskilling, and teams are being reshuffled or changed in different organizations across SA. And often you'll find that someone or an individual's UX maturity or the team's UX maturity is pretty much on par or aligned or similar in many ways, but there's legacy challenges where the organization UX maturity, and specifically the leadership, the understanding and UX maturity is not aligned to the individual and teams. How would you tackle that kind of scenario? What kind of advice would you give that individual or that team?
Well, the first thing I would do is say go easy on yourself. Okay. I think if you're shooting for more than the organization can currently cope with, then you're always going to be a bit frustrated and angry and anxious, and actually therefore not in a good place to create change. So I think the first thing you need to do is go, okay, this is the situation that I'm in, and it sounds like, you know, whoever asked this question is, you know, has sort of diagnosed that situation really clearly, and to just go, okay, breathe. That's where we are today, and that's the limiting factor on our performance. And here are all the problems that are associated with that, and they are our problems today. In time, you will improve it, and you know what? You'll have a new set of problems. Problems never go away; they just get replaced by the next set. So, you know, don't obsess over getting rid of problems. There'll just be new ones tomorrow, but accept these ones. That's my first piece of advice, because that will get you in a much more kind of relaxed, open frame of mind where you're easier to talk to. You're not the difficult person who's always moaning. And you will be saying, hey, let's try this and let's build, and accept that change takes time. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about how I respond in those situations, and I'm terrible. You know, it's really frustrating. I can see how things could be, and recognizing that I need to go slowly and coach people through that change is difficult. And I'm like, but I can do this. Why can't everybody else? You know, learning takes time. So I guess that's really the mindset shift that I would start with, and then you are able to stop being anxious and to listen. You know, you give yourself a little bit of space to listen, and you start to hear what it is that the bosses are telling you, and to think about, again, how your practice aligns with the change that they want, and the things that they want, and to find kind of points of entry. I'm mindful of that. I'm mindful also of, I don't know if you come across the idea of situational leadership, where you have, it's a quadrant diagram. Of course, as a consultant, I love a quadrant diagram. So you think about, you know, is this high ability or low ability? Is this high desire or low desire? And you know, if you're dealing with somebody that is high ability and high desire, you know, they want to do this thing and they're able to do this thing, then you can just delegate it to them. Say, hey, can you go away and do that? And if you're dealing with somebody that is low ability and high desire, you can coach them. You can say, okay, go away and try this, and you know that they will go away and try this, and that they'll learn. And if they're low ability and low desire, then again you have to adopt your leadership. You have to adopt what you're doing and saying, okay, we are going to do this together. I'm going to stay with you. You're going to watch me, and we will learn together. Yeah. So I would also be, you know, as you change your mindset, listen, understand what is the problem that they want to solve next, and focus on that rather than trying to do everything. And then think about, okay, what's my approach to leading change here? What's the situation that I'm in? And which of these styles do I need to adopt? And I'm thinking about a program that I'm working on at the moment, where I've tried to coach people through it. And that's the wrong style. Actually, when I stopped and listened, I realized, like, oh no, they're anxious and they don't know how to do it. Coaching isn't going to work. I need to downgrade, take a smaller cohort of people and do it with them to give them the confidence that I can next time coach them. So, you know, adjust your style according to the situation. Situational leadership is what that's called. If you Google it, there's loads written on it.
Thank you for that. I don't have any more questions, and we don't have any more questions in the ask a question component. But as always, we'll be posting the talk and snippets of it to Twitter and LinkedIn. I'll be tagging Giles, so if you do have any follow-up questions or do want to connect with him, please do so. Yeah, thank you so much for this talk, Giles.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for those good questions. They're meaty questions, and challenging when I'm still halfway through my first cup of coffee. It's been lovely to meet you and the organisers and to be part of it. So thank you for having me.
Well, hopefully next time in person in Cape Town.